EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, October 24th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Craig Gent, author of Cyberboss, The Rise of Algorithmic Management and the New Struggle for Control at Work. Also on the program today, in the CNN town hall, Harris calls Trump a fascist and touts her price gouging plans. National polls show a narrow race, but Maris shows Harris gaining ground, statistically tying Trump in his must-win states of Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina. A woman accuses Trump of groping her in 1993 after being introduced by one Jeffrey Epstein. The DOJ warns Elon Musk that his supposed $1 million giveaway in battleground states might be illegal. Seems like it should be. The LA Times editorial...
Imagine if George Soros...
Yeah. Oh my god. We never hear the end of it. The LA Times editorial editor resigns after the paper's billionaire owner blocks the editorial board's endorsement of Harris. After 40 days on strike, the machinists have rejected Boeing's contract offer of a 35% wage increase over 4 years. Israel's bombardment of Lebanon continues. The healthcare system in South Beirut hangs by a thread. France pledges 100 million euros in aid to Lebanon. And Israel again attacks a school-turned-shelter in central Gaza, killing at least 17, including an 11-month-old baby. University of Michigan regents, many of whom donated to the AG's campaign, Nessel, reportedly bypassed local prosecutors and went straight to her to crack down on anti-genocide protesters. Something like The Guardian investigated 85% of those arrested were charged under her auspices, and then the neighboring counties, it was like they either dropped the charges or it was a small percentage.
Oh, you mean the fundamental issue that we didn't talk about instead of smearing Rashida Tlaib?
Exactly. So she was exactly right about that. The CFPB, lastly, the CFPB forces Apple and Goldman Sachs to pay more than $89 million in fines over their joint credit card due to failures to respond to customer charge disputes. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. Apologies if I'm a little slow today. I can't believe how sick I was. Now, there's always going to be skeptics out there saying I wasn't actually sick, but...
And it coincides with the Giants' loss.
I needed a 3-day recovery after they put up 3 points in the Saquon revenge game, but I couldn't even enjoy football. I fell asleep because I was so sick during football. That's how bad it was. So get your flu shots, everybody. I'm pretty sure that's what I had. I got the COVID shot, and then I was like, oh, I'll wait a little bit closer to Thanksgiving for the flu shot, and it bit me in the ass. So I'm semi back to normal today, but still going to be a little bit on the slower side, so forgive me. Welcome back to Bradley, who is back from vacation.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks to Matt for holding down the fort and doing not 1 but 2, but sometimes 3 jobs.
Good to have you guys
absence.
back.
Yeah.
I'll say that. I can be back on scrolling my phone now.
Enjoy that. You deserve so much more scrolling time as a treat.
Checking all the chats and see if Sam's IM'd me something urgent.
Exactly. All right, let's talk about this town hall last night. So last night, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to undecided voters at a town hall. It was hosted in Pennsylvania by CNN. Anderson Cooper was the moderator. We'll get to this in a sec, but he had like a million follow-up questions about whether or not she supports the border wall, just to give you a sense of where the media...
Which is what all the undecideds are thinking about these days.
And fracking.
We just talk about how do we fill an auditorium of undecideds at this point in an election? Like,
it's amazing, and I listened to them after give their assessments. Two said that who were undecided they're going to vote for Harris out of this panel of 5 people, and I listened to them. I was like, can I glean anything from this? And it's like, no. These people make these undecided voters at this point in the game, they make their decisions based on things that, like, it's difficult for us to understand because we're so plugged in. And if you're listening to this show, you're already exponentially more plugged in than anybody who would be undecided at this point in the race, for the most part. I mean, there are the people that are holding out their vote in protest of the genocide in Gaza, and that's a very specific policy orientation. But for, like, the general undecided voter who's invited to this kind of thing, I mean... what the Harris campaign is banking on is that they're basically moderate Republican-leaning people. And I think that in terms of the bulk of the voters from a math perspective, they're probably right to target those folks. It doesn't lead to the best, I think, political campaign from our perspective. But on the substance, last night, she basically said we have to look at the filibuster to codify abortion protections. She also was asked how she'd be different from Biden, and she kind of just says... I'm not Biden, or my administration will be different.
Look at me.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, we get it, but we need a little bit more than that. And she gave the exact same answer about Palestinian suffering as she had before, over and over again. It's the same memorized response, incredibly frustrating. But this part, in terms of, like, the positives, I actually thought she did a good job last night. This was a portion where she's asked by a town hall attendee about high grocery prices. And here she talks about price gouging, which I think they should lean into a little bit more.
To Eric Swenson. He runs a service desk for an IT company in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. He's registered as a libertarian, describes himself as an independent. He says he's undecided. Eric?
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
So my question is concerning groceries. Grocery prices have gone up quite a bit in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And some people blame former President Trump. Some people blame President Biden. Who would you say is correct? And what would you do to bring prices down for Americans?
Thank you, Eric. And you're absolutely right. You know it. I know it. I think most Americans know it. Price of groceries is still too high. And we need to address it in a number of ways. One of my aspects of doing what we need to do to bring down the cost of living for working people and the middle class in America is to address the issue of grocery prices. Part of my background and how I come to it is probably a new approach grounded in a lot of my experiences as a former attorney general, where I took on price gouging. And part of my plan is to create a new approach that is the first time that we will have a national ban on price gouging, which is companies taking advantage of the desperation and need of the American consumer and jacking up prices without any consequence or accountability. So that is one way. But to your point, Eric, there are a number of issues that we need to address in terms of bringing down the cost of living. It includes what we need is a new approach that I bring to the issue of affordable housing, including, for example, rent. And again, I bring to it my experience, knowing what has been happening in terms of how corporations have been buying up blocks of property to diminish competition, and then rents get jacked up. And addressing that, both in terms of making sure that there is a consequence and accountability for that, but also investing in people's dreams of home ownership, knowing that for too long, frankly, both administrations in both parties, Democrats and Republicans, haven't done enough to deal with the issue of housing. And we need a new approach that includes working with the private sector. I say that as a devout public servant. Working with the private sector to cut through the red tape, working with home builders, working with developers to create tax incentives so that we can create more housing supply and bring down the price.
Let me just ask you about price gouging. I looked at your plan. You talk about going after price gougers, and I'm quoting from the plan, on essential goods during emergencies or times of crisis. I get that. How does that help, though, someone like Eric with prices that for years the groceries price has just been high?
Well, first of all, Anderson, as you know, and obviously CNN has been covering extensively what has been happening in the state of Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. It's a real issue. I was Attorney General of California. I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in the country. I took this issue on because it affects a lot of people. And I'm not going to apologize for the fact that we need to actually deal with accountability when these, not all, in fact, most don't, but when companies are taking advantage of the desperation and the need of the American people. We saw it actually during the pandemic as well, where because of supply chain issues, there was a reduction of supply, and then they would inflate the price of everyday necessities. Not to mention, by the way, again, Donald Trump should be here tonight to talk with you and answer your questions. He's not. He refused to come. But understand that part of his plan is to put in place a national sales tax of at least 20% on everyday goods and necessities. And that, by economist estimates, independent economists, would cost you as the American consumer and taxpayer an additional $4,000 a year.
So that was, I felt like, her strongest answer, especially when she said that both parties were responsible.
That was fascinating because she was cooking at that moment. And then when she said that, she said both administrations first. And I think that was a little bit too
honest. She's very measured. And this is the kind of thing where, I don't want to overplay this, but I actually, before I got sick, I was having a conversation with EmMajority on her podcast on Friday, which I guess it hasn't come out, EmMajority Lauren. I don't know if it's come out yet, but we were basically talking about the differences in how sometimes women have to present themselves in the public eye. And her and I were very much instinctively aligned on this, which was interesting. And her, as a woman of color, I think understands this as well. But Kamala Harris has less leeway than a male politician, especially a white male politician, in the way that she disciplines her message. And you can see, when she gets all mealy-mouthed like that, it's this obvious self-consciousness, I think, about straying off message. So she can sound like she's memorized a lot of things at times. And I think that that is true. But it's also because she's being told, and you see her laugh less, be serious, wear dark colors, look presidential. I also think that's why they sidelined Walz. I don't think that was a good idea. But they wanted to put him in the way that, by the way, J.D. Vance has been sidelined, but I think that has more to do with his unfavorables. They sidelined Walz because they were like, okay, this is the point of the campaign where she has to look like commander-in-chief. And for what it's worth, I think they're doing their best in that regard. But I like that she mentioned both administrations and then she walked it back. And the fact of the matter is that 37 states across the country have individual laws on price gouging to prevent companies from doing this kind of thing during natural disasters. When Anderson Cooper follows that question up and he's like, well, we're talking about natural disasters. What does that have to do with the prices that this individual man, the registered libertarian, who, by the way, later was interviewed by CNN and said that he liked her answer about how she'd work with other people towards a solution, and then he was going to vote for her. He was one of the people who was swayed. It's like, work with other people. I thought you were a libertarian. Yeah. Anyway, but when she talks about price gouging in this way, federalizing this would make sense because Anderson Cooper, dude, the disaster that we were talking about that led to the greedflation, which was called a leftist conspiracy theory for a while, which she actually articulated there. The disaster was COVID, and particular industries. Yes, as Harris mentioned, there were supply chain issues, there were backlogs and work stoppages because we have globalized our supply chain to such a degree.
And to capitalists, that is opportunity.
That it affected our economy. That's part of why the Biden administration rightly tried to onshore a lot of our manufacturing, and they've had success in that regard. And she would try to continue that policy. Cooper doesn't even subscribe to the idea that corporations artificially jacked up prices that led to inflation, taking advantage of the supply chain issues and elongating those higher prices so they could take home record profits. It's in the books. They took home record profits. So if it's still just naturally occurring inflation, in theory, that would affect the stock buybacks and the corporate money that goes to the executives, but it didn't. And so that's what Harris was articulating there. I just can't believe that one of the top paid anchors in the country doesn't recognize that, yes, it was greedflation that led to these increased prices and still does.
So he also like alluded to maybe even a pre-COVID type economy thing, and like, okay, Anderson, Vanderbilt, Cooper, like the broader long-term trend is wages haven't been rising.
Yeah.
Very briefly, we saw some wage growth, and everybody celebrates it like it's the new hallelujah, but that should be normal. That wages are growing because the economy is growing, and so like since the financial crisis, yeah, people's wages have stuck. So it does seem like if people's wages were growing, it wouldn't be such a big problem that grocery prices have been ticking up even pre-pandemic and stuff like that. Like it's just a broader context that is just completely missing from like, is this Kamala Harris's fault, or what are you going to do about gougers? Like, can we have a memory that goes back to like that the economy was still an issue in 2016 and Bernie Sanders ran an insurgent campaign about how not great it was?
Well, I mean, okay, so you're asking for us to have a memory. I bring you this next question by Anderson Cooper because this part was just astounding to me. Remember when the entire media ecosystem laughed at Donald Trump saying that he wanted to build the wall and that Mexico would pay for it? Well, now Anderson Cooper is very upset that Kamala Harris hasn't met Trump in the middle on this regard. This is where he followed up most in this town hall.
Compromise bill that you want to pass if you're elected. You said that's going to be a priority. It includes $650 million in funding for the border wall. That's something Republicans wanted. That was part of the compromise. Under Donald Trump, you criticized the wall more than 50 times. You called it stupid, useless, and a medieval vanity project. Is a border wall stupid?
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump and that border wall. So remember, Donald Trump said Mexico would pay for it? Come on, they didn't. How much of that wall did he build? I think the last number I saw is about 2%. And then when it came time for him to do a photo op, you know where he did it? In the part of the wall that President Obama built.
But you're agreeing to a bill that would earmark $650 million to continue building that wall.
I pledge that I am going to bring forward that bipartisan bill to further strengthen and secure our border. Yes, I am. And I'm going to work across the aisle to pass a comprehensive bill that deals with a broken immigration system. I think Jackson's question, part of it was to acknowledge that America has always had migration, but there needs to be a legal process for it. People have to earn it. Ugh. And that's the point that I think is the most important point that can be made, which is we need a president who is grounded in common sense and practical outcomes. Like, let's just fix this thing. Let's just fix it. Why is there any ideological perspective on this? Let's just fix the problem.
To fix the problem, you're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I'm not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
I think what he did and how he did it did not make much sense because he actually didn't do much of anything.
I mean, okay, so there's so much wrong there. First of all, the Anderson Cooper dude, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when this was considered a joke. And now it's like, oh, so you don't think it's stupid? You agree that we should be funding the border wall. I mean, yeah, that was a part of the compromise right-wing bill with the Republicans that Biden clearly thought that and correctly, that Trump would cave to his self-interest and say, hey, don't pass anything while Biden's president with the Senate GOP, even though Langford had been working on it for a while. I don't want to notch him a win. And so now they're using this on the campaign trail without really saying anything much of substance on the issue of immigration at all. And that's the problem here, is that we've talked about this repeatedly on the show. When you cede all of the context of the conversation or the framing to the Republicans,
saying there's a problem,
this is what you get. You go from 2016, where anchors like Anderson Cooper were treating the border wall as the joke that it is, and Trump's claims about Mexico paying for it as the joke that it is, to the moment in 2024, nearly 10 years since he started running, where it's like, well, don't you agree with him? Can't you meet Donald Trump halfway? And you leave that oxygen when you don't say anything except we have to fix our broken immigration system and Republicans don't want to fix it. And we got to be tough and also have a pathway to citizenship. There's a reason that the graph for public perception on immigration has gone like this, and it's not in the Democrats' direction. And, you know, it's a global phenomenon. The right is better organized. I think the Steve Bannonites and the Viktor Orban worship was a real strategy for global right-wing campaigns, particularly in Europe and the United States. But that doesn't mean that the Democrats in particular, as a political party in this country, haven't midwifed this political problem for themselves. And so... I
mean, she's doing the exact same thing Bill Clinton did to Bob Dole. You search Bill Clinton, Bob Dole immigration commercials 1996, and it's the Bob Dole's saying he's super weak on all this stuff, and Bill Clinton being like, well, look at all these cops I hired for the border.
Right.
And it has just moved, and what he said is it's grant the premise that this is a police issue as opposed to a immigration processing issue.
Right.
And also let's not say destabilize, I don't know, Venezuela by causing a depression on its oil industry type of thing, and displace people. Like this is a much broader thing than building a goddamn wall. And that it's become the sort of like, well, but are you going to build it? It's really bleak.
You see how the conversation has completely deteriorated, and all she would have to say is say, hey, you know, I believe in this country. Both my parents came here from different parts of the world, although that would remind folks about her being black and Indian, which she doesn't want to do. You don't even need to say that. The Statue of Liberty is a beacon of hope for this country. It says, bring us, you're tired, you're hungry, right?
You're need to breathe free, yeah.
Right. And so you can invoke that and essentially say, yes, our immigration system is broken, but we have to work together with the other side to make sure that people are able to be safely processed and their asylum claims are able to go through a court system as opposed to people constantly slipping under the cracks of our broken immigration system. And then you can do all your tough talk. But the real problem is not the brokenness of our immigration system is not that people are coming into this country. That's what America is in its most idealized version supposed to be about. We're supposed to be a nation of immigrants. I remember learning that in history class in high school or in middle school or whatever. That is a premise that you could invoke, and most Americans would understand that. And you could still do the tough talk. But just hitting Republicans on hypocrisy isn't enough, because then you just see it reflected in the media there. They basically now accepted the border wall as a legitimate premise of where to start the conversation, and that's a failure.
And I mean, we need to get to, I guess, I know, but you know, Aaron Riesland Melnick has pointed out that when you actually walk people through this thing and say like, well, this is what the deportations would lead to, or this is what actual sensible legal immigration, investing in making sure people employers can't abuse them for labor or whatever, people prefer that.
Right, exactly. All right, folks, we're going to get to our guest, Craig, in just a second. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. If supporting foundational health was a sport, you would want Ritual on your team. They made Essential for Men, a multivitamin that's based solely on science and designed to help fill common nutrient gaps in the diet with 10 key nutrients. I know Sam is a ritualistic user of Ritual, and I gotta get this for my fiance, because honestly, I just feel like men in particular, not to stereotype a little, but sometimes aren't as good as taking vitamins or things like that as women, or maybe not as on top of those kinds of things. But when you have a subscription service, it makes it super easy. And Ritual is science-backed. It has multivitamins for men 18 plus with high quality, traceable key ingredients in the clean, bioavailable forms. 10 key nutrients in 2 delayed response capsules per day. They're designed to dissolve later in the small intestine, an optimal place to absorb nutrients. They are gentle on an empty stomach with a minty essence in every bottle that helps make taking your multis actually enjoyable. Ritual works with world-class certification bodies to validate their products. Ritual multivitamins are vegan, non-GMO, product verified, gluten and major allergen-free, certified B Corp, and made traceable. Ritual uses scientific tools to select lower carbon packaging, prioritize sustainably sourced ingredients, and set ambitious climate goals. Ritual is a female-founded B corporation, meaning they are holding themselves accountable not just to their company's financial health, but also the health of the people and our planet. Essential for Men is a quality multivitamin from a company that you can actually trust. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/majority. Start Ritual and add Essential for Men to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/majority for 25% off. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Craig Gent. We are back, and we are joined now by Craig Gent, writer, editor, researcher, director at Novara Media, and author of Cyberboss, The Rise of Algorithmic Management and the New Struggle for Control at Work. Craig, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So there is a lot to talk about, I think, about AI, but not the talk that you'll usually hear in the media, because it's usually about, oh no, kids are going to cheat on their homework, or it's going to become sentient and take over the planet, like some sci-fi movie, or it's about, replacing human beings, I guess. And there's some truth to that part, but usually the most highly publicized fears, I feel like, about AI are centered around how powerful and investment worthy that technology is. But your book talks about how AI has already had an effect on the workplace, and that may be a good place to start. How have workers in these particular sectors that you profile here in your book been affected by the rise of AI?
So in the book, I primarily look at logistical workplaces, but really because they're at the apex of a nexus of concerns that involve the use of precarious contracts, but also the use of technology over workers and to control the work process itself. So maybe historically we've often thought about technology being used to replace workers. In this book, I explore cases where what's really happening is that technology is being used to manage workers and to ramp up their performance to ever greater levels.
And so in terms of enhancing workers, what are the prime examples that people may be familiar with in their daily life?
It can be like carrot and stick. So some of the sort of carrot type approaches can be sort of gamification. So people who work with in the gig economy, for example, might have gamified kind of aspects of the interface that they interact with there to kind of lure them into working harder and longer. But it's also the case that they use sort of very punitively. One workplace that I looked at, the worker would be tracked and monitored all day long by kind of a wristwatch. It's kind of more like a big sort of smartphone attached to his forearm. And he'd work through the day, and then the following morning he'd wake up to a text message saying whether that day's shift was confirmed or cancelled on the basis of the productivity score that he hit the day before. And so it had real kind of work or not work consequences for him.
And so that's more of a replacement of a management structure via AI, almost. Can you can you talk about that? Because that is a replacement of, managers they don't own the means of production. They're still workers. What does that mean for that class above, I guess, the people doing the physical work?
Yeah, so like this kind of AI is algorithmic management, which has been referred to as like the automation of management as a kind of shorthand. But it definitely has like a big effect, like number of big effects like on the workplace. There's this kind of like hollowing out of like managers' knowledge, where, you know, even supervisors within the work process, like they're not kind of there to like oversee so much as they are to advise people on how best to work to this kind of algorithmic system. Indeed, lots of workplaces I looked at, workers were frequently advised to just trust the system because, you know, the workers can be wrong about something, the managers might even be wrong about something because they're human, but the inhuman technological system cannot be wrong and is infallible. And it also has the effect that there's this kind of plausible deniability that, you know, quite bad things can happen to workers, but it's blamed on the algorithm rather than being blamed on the actual kind of like power structures that are deploying the algorithm as such. So although algorithmic management is all about the real-time monitoring, tracking, assessing of work performance and of workers, the effect itself is a managerial effect, same as it ever was in a way. It's just that it's a strategy that's sort of deployed to obfuscate the power relations of the workplace.
Does it also physically separate management from the workforce? So there's less of an understanding from management about the practical problems that the workforce is facing on a day-to-day basis, and it's more just about gaming. When you gamify and like someone's workplace and an incentive structure in that way, then the managers are just there to manage the gaming of the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you see this in a number of workplaces where, you know, the point of management, like throughout the work process, so whether this is, you know, people riding for, you know, a gig economy company delivering food, or whether they're like working at Amazon, they're not interacting with managers with a sort of like a high degree of regularity. Their main kind of like interaction with management is actually interaction with an interface, like either an app in the case of a gig economy, or interacting with like a handheld scanner, or that kind of sort of like screen-based interface in those kinds of work that is like instructing them and sort of like telling them what to do. And if they've got any kind of like problems, it's not like they can kind of like readily take it up with the thing that is giving them the problem. Like they just have the interface to interact with.
And in terms of atomizing workers, does this also have a chilling effect on organizing when you kind of put an algorithm or computerization in the middle of the workforce? It also probably, as I was kind of alluding to with the management piece, it physically separates them as well.
Yeah, so it absolutely physically enables the physical separation of workers as well. So, I mean, you mentioned at the top there about, you know, AI being kind of investment worthy, and definitely one of the things that makes these technologies investment worthy in a work context is that they separate workers and make work both an affectively sort of dull experience, or at least monotonous experience, where the whole workflow is kind of governed by these sort of algorithmic steps and processes that sort of loop and loop and loop to make up the entire working day with very little sort of variation. But also that they enable workers to be organized like throughout a workplace in such a way that they have very little interaction with each other. And the combination of these two things together robs workers of time and also of collectivity, which of course are two prerequisites for any kind of taking action together.
And what I also found fascinating about your book is, in terms of taking action, there are other ways that workers will rebel, for lack of a better phrase, against these oppressive technological management systems. One of them was pretty funny, involving DVDs and Star Wars, but there are some examples, if you don't mind, telling a few anecdotes from your book.
No, this is everyone's favorite one, actually, funny enough. But so like with the management, the algorithmic management system, like, creates this scenario where work is very sort of tightly controlled and administrated by this technology, this set of technologies. And many workers that I spoke to for the book would try to find ways, any way that they could leverage agency within the workplace. And so often this centered around time and unsanctioned breaks, for example. So in one workplace that I encountered, the workers had discovered a code that they could press into their scanner, and it would momentarily sort of take them out of the productivity calculation, and this would allow them to go and take an unsanctioned break without any kind of like decline in their productivity score by the end of the day. And to the point, this was getting shared around to the point where, one worker told me that he'd go to the break room and you see someone else who's not supposed to be there, and they kind of like nod at each other, and it's like, okay, you know that, like, who's been sharing the code. So like unsanctioned breaks and sort of reclamation of time was quite a big one. But this the DVD case that you're sort of alluding to is that I spoke to a worker who worked in an online shopping department for a major supermarket. So these are the people who go around the store. It works different places. Sometimes they might be around a warehouse. In this case, he went around a regular store, but out of hours, to collect people's online supermarket deliveries that they've placed on the internet. And as he's going around, he realizes that the one small piece of agency that he has in his role is that he can choose the substitution if an item isn't present. And not only that, but when he chooses the substitution, if he substitutes an item and says it's not there, so I've chosen this one, then all of the workers behind him who would have been going to choose, item A, will instead be choosing item B, because he's also updating the stock inventory. So it's actually quite a bit of agency that he's got suddenly over the process of all these workers collecting people's goods. And he decides that every time someone orders a DVD of any kind, he's going to substitute it for Rogue One, a Star Wars story, for the reason that, in his words, it's a sick film and everyone should see it. And it gives him enough plausible. Do you know what? Like, I actually tried to watch that film 3 times now, and each time I fell asleep in the cinema. So yeah. Well, anyway, but he was convinced, and as is his right, and he would substitute the DVD for Star Wars Rogue One, because in his words, there's a sort of like a latitude there. It's a Disney film, it's a kids film, it's an action film, but someone would be ordering like Peppa Pig, and they're getting Star Wars Rogue One, which is quite amusing. And so, I said to him, like, is this not just sort of churlish? And he said, actually, it's serious to me. He says, away from the jokes, this is about dignity, because I'm paid so badly and my work is so tightly controlled that I feel compelled, for the sake of my own dignity, to make every moment that I'm at work cost that little bit more.
And can I ask, was that worker in the UK, or?
This was a worker in the UK, yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't mind talking a little bit about the role of unions in this, because, in the United States, we have seen Amazon union busting over and over again. It's caught the attention of the National Labor Relations Board. But the problem with our system is that basically these mega corporations have enough money to eat the fees that are levied at them by our enforcement agencies. And they can just tie up these unions, especially if they're smaller startup unions, in litigation and all that kind of stuff. The power differential, it's just so massive that they just engage in anti-labor practices that are flagrantly against the law and then eat the fines. Starbucks also experienced or practiced some of this. So I'm not as familiar with the percentage of labor that's unionized that works at a place like Amazon in the UK, but how do unions play into this?
Okay, so like the unions are, clearly aware of like what's happening. But one of my starting points for the book was an observation that despite the fact that this kind of whole set of concerns and this sort of like around this like draconian sort of work practices that seem to, give us very bleak prospects for the future. Despite the understanding that they are technologically enabled in some way, all of the demands that I was seeing and all of the sort of strategy that I was seeing was around precariousness, so primarily pay and contracts, and recognition agreements and seeking recognition agreements with employers. And this kind of strategy of always sort of prioritizing the recognition agreement would lead to some kind of unintended consequences, honestly. So, for example, one workplace that I looked at, they put all of their eggs into the basket of trying to get a recognition agreement, only to have a sort of smaller, more of a yellow union sign a kind of sweetheart deal with the employer, which then forced the first union kind of out of there altogether. And so they hadn't even really begun organizing yet, and they'd put all these resources into recognition, and then the employer had sort of turned around and signed a deal with a different, more compliant union. But then that union that got messed over in the first case did the same thing to a sort of smaller, more grassroots union at Uber, actually. And that union signed a massive deal. This was a GMB, signed a massive deal with Uber, and sort of sang it from the rooftops as the first like major recognition agreement with a platform, a gig economy platform. But the trade-off was any mechanism of a pay bargaining. And as you might expect, then Uber then was suddenly like putting adverts onto podcasts saying, oh, we're good now because like we're partnered with the GMB union. And it was just a sort of big sort of PR stunt, So I think in the book, one of the things that's been taken as a sort of kind of provocative, but like, I hope it's kind of like a friendly kind of criticism, is that I do think that within, unions and among trade unionists, and I count myself in that, we need to think differently about how we've been doing things, because I think prioritizing recognition, prioritizing, things that kind of exist in these kinds of like boardrooms is playing into the hands of managers. And we're actually never getting into the question of technology whatsoever. And so, the demands around the actual use of technology, certainly in this country, are really kind of nowhere. At most, they're kind of stuck on the thorns of like debates around like transparency and making the processes more transparent, which I think is a bit misleading, because really there is no section of computer code in an algorithmic management system that you could hope to shed light on that would explain in the new power dynamics of the workplace. You need to speak to the workers for that. One worker I spoke to, he said that his union did have a recognition agreement with his employer, and the union had agreed for time and motion studies to be done on the workers, and it ended up with him having a heavier trolley to push around, and he was never consulted over any of it. So unionization in and of itself is I think we need to sort of move the conversation on a little bit to like the actual question of like union strategy. And one of the reasons why I look at these alternative forms of rebellion is not because I think that they themselves are the answer, but notably many of the people I spoke to who were engaged in them were not enamored with their unions, despite the fact that they were in them, and saw it as a more direct way to reclaim agency themselves. I would make the argument that unions need to be widening the repertoire of tactics and strategies that they're willing to engage in.
And I guess that brings me to the question of when the demands, I guess hypothetically, when the demands move from basically taking over some of the technology here, or from, transparency or for recognition, to owning a piece of the pie. I mean, that kind of thing sounds pretty a long ways away in the United States, but there are these big tech companies operate elsewhere, as you say. Could that be a path forward in terms of more ambition from union demands?
I'm unsure, and I'm kind of yet to be convinced of the argument that many unions the world over are making, in which they say, often as a line of defense, actually, they'll say, we're not anti-technology, we just want to share the benefit and make sure workers share the benefit. I'm not actually convinced that there is a great benefit of these particular technologies for workers to share in, because the technologies are designed to be anti-worker in the first place. So actually, I feel like in some cases, what ought to be the demand is some level, honestly, of like suppression or like pulling back from where we've got to. This could happen in a number of ways. So I know that in France, for example, unions have still used the kind of like legislative route, but what they've done is they've lobbied for a minimum order fee, so you can't get free delivery, and this is encouraging people to sort of group their orders together on Amazon, for example, and taking that kind of last mile pressure off of some of those supply chains that is enabling a bit more of a conversation around this kind of seemingly technological but really managerial pressure to absolutely optimize everything, which of course just squeezes labor.
And in terms of this, as it relates to gig work in particular, is that what makes this technology so unique too? Is that it exploits workers in this particular way, where gig work is a way for these companies to not provide any benefits for their employees and save a lot of money. And it seems like at least the usage of this automation is an extension of that way that the workforce has been conceptualized.
It's definitely the case that these technologies are being deployed, many instances, maybe even the majority, to facilitate precarious working conditions. I would agree with that. However, I would probably also go a little further and say that I don't feel that there's really any amount of fixing wages or contract conditions that would improve the way that it feels to work with these technologies, which is fundamentally that it kind of robs people of time, agency, and dignity. And so I feel like we almost need a sort of a different sort of starting point in that sense. I think that we often focus on pay because it's where we've become accustomed to beginning within sort of union struggles. But I think that when I spoke to many workers for the book, they're really complaining of feeling like they've been stripped of dignity. And I think that's something that we have to kind of take up, because what's novel to the technology is not so much like what it can enable, but it's the fact that it invokes an enormous amount of computing power. It's really the real-time nature of the technologies. They can track and monitor and redirect workers in real time, and it's putting that up against you and me. And it's not just happening in gig work, and it's not just happening in the Amazon fulfillment center. It's increasingly happening it happens in McDonald's now. It's happening in Starbucks, like it's happening in offices. Explorations being done on the algorithmic management of emotion through emotion trackers. and sort of like wearable technologies that we've previously associated with health, such as the use of, sort of Fitbits, sleep monitoring,
or motion trackers. Sorry, I want to make
emotion.
sure. Emotion. Oh,
Emotion.
Okay. Well, back in my camp days, I'd get the $10 that my mom sent me and buy a mood ring at the store. I guess now mood rings for workers, because if you're not happy when you're working, you better make yourself happy.
That's right. I mean, you can get, you get the. I presume you have them in the US too. You have the rings now that monitor your health while you sleep, supposedly.
Right.
But think of these same technologies, these kinds of wearables, that really become kind of like quite intimate technologies in a way, being controlled by your boss instead.
Oh boy. Well, extremely dystopian, but also really informative. The book is called Cyberboss, The Rise of Algorithmic Management and the New Struggle for Control at Work. Craig Gent, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, T.
Folks, we're going to head into the fun half shortly, but I wanted to play this one clip for you in lieu of a second guess. So Bill Ackman, people may remember this guy.
It's funny to call a guy a billionaire investor.
No, he's a billionaire.
But that's the thing is it didn't invent anything.
Yeah.
It's just there's not even a one major bet or anything that you can say. You're just he had a bunch of money and made more money with money.
But when you say investor, it's like when Republicans refer to themselves as taxpayers. It's like, I am providing value, so I am human above humans. Okay?
But of course they don't provide value. They provide money that people could get if we didn't give all these people money and hoard it, and then they take a return on it.
Well,
that's how they get more money.
I mean, on CNBC, though, it's hard to make that case, given the ideological bent of the financial news channel, right?
That's the parasite news.
They have, I mean, Andrew Ross Sorkin here does the best, he's done some good interviews for a financial reporter, right? Based on the exact kind of underlying set of assumptions that Matt outlines there. So Bill Ackman, you'll remember him maybe as the guy who doxed Harvard students who were protesting against Israel committing genocide against the Palestinian people.
I remember him 10 years ago as the guy who failed to short a pyramid scheme named Herbalife. He lost a lot of money to a pyramid scheme, betting against a pyramid scheme, which is a funny loss to take.
Absolutely.
It is
still a billionaire, though.
And not taking any lessons about the broader economy, given that, scams like Herbalife can continue despite even a heroic individual like Bill Ackman saying it's a joke.
Yeah, and if Elon Musk jumping around like a dipshit, as Tim Walls referred to it, or if hearing Peter Thiel talk didn't already dispel you of the notion that billionaire equals really smart guy, here is Bill Ackman again, the anti-Semitism crusader, defending Donald Trump reportedly liking Hitler and saying he wanted Hitler's generals around him on CNBC.
First of all, you were a longtime Democrat. You've supported Democrats. We talked about this.
I would say I've always been a centrist, but I've supported more Democrats by far than Republicans.
I just want to read you. This is John Kelly, the former chief of staff of Trump. He worked with him directly.
Sure.
And he says that in many cases, I would agree with some of his policies. So you agree with the policy piece of this that I think Trump is presenting. But he says it's very dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to have the wrong person elected in high office. He goes on to say, in his opinion, he believes that Trump meets the definition of a fascist, would govern like a dictator if allowed, and has no understanding of the Constitution or the concept of the rule of law. He goes on to say that Trump had made admiring statements to him about Hitler, you're Jewish and care about Israel, had expressed contempt for disabled veterans, and had characterized those who died on the battlefield for the U.S. as losers and suckers. How do you get your head around that?
Well, one, it's one person stating a series of things, which I don't know whether...
There are 28 people who have worked for the president, not just in close proximity, but in the Oval Office with him, who have come out publicly and expressed things of this sort.
Pause it real quick, Brad. This whole one person thing. There wasn't one person that said like, "Oh, Obama's reading like Joseph Stalin like party discipline pamphlets." There's multiple people before this. Trump's ex-wife in divorce papers saying on his bedside table, it's not Mein Kampf, which would be the obvious thing to say as a lie.
Still would be weird.
But it was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which is like something that I don't think she would know about published unless it was actually there on the bedstand table.
It's very specific. And again, these, Milley coming out and saying this is very specific in and of itself, and it's been corroborated. But the Trump campaign is going to deny it because there's no audio of it. But I mean, again, like this is the exact right line of questioning, I think, that he's approaching Ackman with, which is the inherent differentiation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Because if this dude, Ackman, who again targeted like teenagers at Harvard and tried to use and throw his weight around as an alumni of that school, he took out LED billboard trucks with the faces of the kids, often minority students, at Harvard with their information and drove them around the square at the school. This guy's a deranged lunatic under the auspices of saying he's combating anti-Semitism. Here, Sorkin is explicitly saying the guy you're supporting, according to, he's citing John Kelly, but it was also the Milley statement, right? Is expressing admiration for Hitler and Hitler's generals. That would be pretty anti-Semitic if put into practice. Here's Ackman defending that.
In close proximity, but in the Oval Office with him, who have come out publicly and expressed things of this sort.
Actually, Kamala Harris lost 92% of her staff, too. But I think that's a relevant sort of point.
Wait. Kamala Harris lost 92% of her staff. She had staff turnover. Okay. Did they all leave because she was saying, "I love Hitler"?
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
2% of her staff, too. But I think that's a relevant sort of point. So if you want to talk about, I don't...
The Hitler thing.
I just want one piece on that. There are people who would argue that maybe she was not an organized person and was not a good executive in that regard, right? But I don't know of anybody who came out publicly against Kamala Harris claiming that she was for Hitler, that she was against the Constitution, that she was calling people who died on the battlefield on our behalf losers. Let's stipulate that.
Okay. Let me address. Number one, I don't think Trump is for Hitler. Okay, I think that's absurd. Okay. And you know first of all, why say it when you know that Hey, I get this.
What do you think about his generals?
I don't. Maybe you give me an hour. Okay,
let's see how long it takes. Please.
You know it's not true. Why say it?
So one, Trump's not for Hitler. Most of Trump's friends are Jewish. He grew up in the New York City real estate community. He's got a daughter who's Jewish. He's got grandchildren who's Jewish. He was probably the most pro-Israel president in terms of committing to do things and actually executing on them.
He said.
Moving the embassy, delivering the control of the Golan Heights to Israel.
By the way, I'm just asking the question.
He's Hitlerian sort of Lebensraum.
The other thing that hasn't been...
Sorry, we have to say Lebensraum.
Yeah.
Which is, I forget how the exact definition, but basically what we called over in America, like room to move your arms.
Yeah, I think it translates like living space or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Elbow room, as James Fenimore Cooper called it over in the Americas, as we were dispossessing the natives. It's not a surprise that, taking territory in war, there's a through line here. It's very, I think, historically difficult for a lot of people to understand on the surface of it. But yeah, like when you have somebody like Bill Ackman, you understand how this happens, where Trump is a documented sort of Nazi curious person.
When he first ran for president, he went to or I forget when this was. I mean, again, he's been running for president for nearly 10 years at this point. But he went to a group of Jewish donors, and he's basically said, "You love making deals and all that kind of thing." The dude has... Yeah. I mean, his father was arrested at a Klan riot in the early 20th century in New York City, in Queens. Like, it would not be a shock that a younger Donald Trump would be reading Hitler speeches, given his lifelong fixation on trying to prove his father wrong and maybe trying to be like him in certain ways. We don't need to psychoanalyze this guy any more than we already have. But I mean, I do want to just put out there for everybody what Bill Ackman represents here. He is dismissive of Donald Trump's clear red flashing anti-Semitism, I love Hitler, authoritarianism kind of thing. Because look at what he did for Israel. He delivered the Golan Heights.
Because of
Don't
nationalism.
You see? Because apparently that's pro-Jewish people, according to Bill Ackman. I would argue that continuing to tie Jewish identity to the Zionist project only furthers anti-Semitism. Now, I don't know if Ackman's ready to have that conversation, but at the very least, you should be, if you're a liberal Zionist watching this, and apparently there are a few well-known liberal Zionists that watch this program, one in particular. If you are still out there and you're basically saying that people who are anti-Zionist are anti-Semitic, look at how one of the most public, well-financed by himself Zionists out there is defending the guy who praised Hitler and Hitler's generals because of his defense of Israel. That says everything you need to know, because it's not about Jewish identity.
It's about nationalism.
At the end of the day, it's about colonialism, it's about expansionism. And it's about billionaire ghouls like this guy wanting to take all of the territory in what operates as Greater Israel, but is really the occupied West Bank and the open-air prison that is the Gaza Strip. And when we're talking about historical parallels, you see the images coming out of northern Gaza as they continue to push Palestinians together into these very tiny portions of the Strip, and you can't help but think about the Warsaw Ghetto, in my view.
Of course, Sam was talking about that when you were out.
Oh, there we go. Where and the rebellions, by the way.
Yep.
But the concentration of a group of people and putting them on a diet and starving them as they did in Warsaw. And then there was a part 2 to that. And when I see Palestinian men being driven out on trucks with their hands bound behind them, shirtless, and they're blindfolded, what do you think is happening next?
Yeah, it's extermination. And I mean, people like Bill Ackman, liberal Zionists, have gotten a lot of mileage out of the on the surface contradiction of Jewish people and Nazis. When you put it as Zionists and Nazis, there's actually a historical precedent to this. You can search the Novara Agreement, which I agree with Hassan that it's not great to overemphasize things like that. But nationalism is the problem here. And Bill Ackman is doing Hitler apology for Donald Trump because Donald Trump is the greater supporter of Israel in this election.
Exactly right.
And it's a close race.
Yeah. Not as close as I think the media is making it, in my view. I mean,
well, that's what's funny.
I have a whole nother rant about the media is very invested in. It's such a close race. Tune in to our 24-hour countdown clock to Kamala Harris's town hall. Like, I mean, we got to be a little bit honest about the incentives for the media in terms of making this into the. And on the surface, I get it. There are a lot of polls that say it's exactly close, but in terms of there's also a lot of pollsters who were really embarrassed by 2016. And then in 2020, there were issues with the methodology because the people that were being called were all the folks that were more willing to answer the phone in 2020 were more likely to be Democrats because they were isolating during COVID, and Republicans were out and about. But they still got things right. It's just that they thought Biden was going to win by a wider margin. A lot of experts think they're overcorrecting in the way that they did in 2022 for Republicans. So. But I mean, knocking on wood.
I hope you're right about that. Well, one other point I wanted to make about it's weird. Like our party is like both supporters of Israel, right? We know this.
Yeah.
It does seem like the Republican Party is like I've always sort of like thought like okay, the Republicans are Likud and the Democrats are Labor.
Yeah.
Right. This whole thing that we got going on, you start to see a little bit of a liberal Zionist starting to be like, oh, we have to be a Likud.
Yeah.
Like that's the logic of this. That's I think some of the stuff we're seeing in the streaming space is some liberal Zionists are realizing actually Likud, the thing that I believed, actually those fascists like were the ones more clear-eyed about what it takes to actually do this, which is bloodshed and violence and using any provocation to ethnically cleanse a population out of an area. And the liberal Zionists were just in sort of a fantasy land. And now,
but they're choosing.
But they're choosing now, and I think it's not a surprise to me that certain people would break toward Likud as opposed to anti-Zionism, and it is a goddamn shame on all those people.
It really is, and I just I know. Oh, hello, Brandon.
Our guests. Let me bring them.
We'll bring those guys in, but I've been coughing the whole time, so don't worry about it. But I just want to make this one final point there. This is where the rubbers meet in the road here for liberal Zionists, and as Matt says, a lot of them are choosing to basically go down the Likud path as opposed to deal with this inherent contradiction where it's like, the Holocaust is one of the greatest crimes in the history of humanity. We also committed genocide in Africa. A lot of Europeans
America.
Did. In America.
Maybe one of the greatest by raw numbers, depending on how you tot it up.
Exactly. But I mean, even like the Dutch genocide in Africa, where over a few 2 decades or something,
right.
They killed like 10 million people. Like we don't have that same cultural memory about that, right? And I think a lot of liberal Zionists, they felt that because of the abject, unspeakable, but we speak about it, we have to, crime of the Holocaust and what that meant for Jewish people, that they've kind of constructed because of that trauma, an imagery of a self-conception of themselves as inherently anti-racist, because they were the victims of one of the worst genocides in the history of humanity. But what liberal Zionists need to contend with is that that's not actually the case right now, because anti-Muslim bigotry in this country is bipartisan. And with liberal Zionists and with Zionists broadly, it's actually more pronounced. And so I think what's hard for liberal Zionists is that, I always voted Democrat. I always supported Black Lives Matter. I did all this kind of stuff that was easy for me as a Democrat, as a liberal within the context of the United States. But I think it really is cracking at the foundation of a certain self-identity to say, like, but actually, though, you are racist, unfortunately for you.
Because
what you went through in the Holocaust doesn't mean that you don't have to contend with that. And it's not just Zionists. We have anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism in this country. Basically, it's the most broadly acceptable form of bigotry that I can think of, because both sides of the aisle engage on it on a regular basis. And liberal Zionists, as Matt is saying, they basically decided, some of them, okay, I'm just going to lean into the racism and say that the people calling it out are the real anti-Semites and bigots. And unfortunately for them, it may feel good for them in the short term, but history is not going to be on their side.
Yeah, and just one, I know we're talking a lot on this, but like and people have multiple identities, including overlap of both of these, but what the Holocaust meant for Jewish people and what it meant for Zionists are two different things.
Yes.
And that contradiction is appearing before our eyes right now. And, that's why it's, I think all the anti-Zionist leaders that we're seeing, like those people are showing the way. And this is a moment right now where people need to reckon with this thing. And there are a whole bunch of people who want to stand in the way of those people having a clear view of like what's just in this world. And I think they're going to lose. And they can be more and more hysterical in the coming months and they can be in our chat as much as they want. You're losing, guys.
Exactly. And who isn't losing are our winners over here, our guests for the. This is how you call. This is what a transition looks like, folks. We are in the winning circle. Thank you very much. I'm a professional broadcaster. Matt and Brandon. Hello, guys.
Here's Bradley, Brandon, and Matt. Yeah.
It's a crosstalk.
I'm getting over the flu, so apologies if my voice sounds a little odd. Brandon, what's happening on the discourse?
Well, we have a new episode out for patrons on the Patreon.
Man, you're muted.
Oh, I'm not supposed to be, am I?
No, you're
Still
back.
muted?
You're back.
Okay.
It was just a lag. Yeah. It was just a lag. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I have a new episode out for patrons on the Patreon, as well as I will be uploading the first or third and second streams that I did on Twitch, and then we'll also be doing some more Twitch streaming tomorrow and or maybe Saturday. So follow me at Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter /X, the Everything app, to find out when that's going to be.
All right, the Everything app, exactly.
The Everything app.
Where you go for inherently to watch videos. Duh. I mean, isn't that totally intuitive?
It's where I go for everything from like Nazism to neo-Nazism.
Broad spectrum. Matt Binder, what's happening on Scam Economy, Doomed, Leftist Mafia, all your shows?
Yeah, sure. So Leftist Mafia tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, at youtube.com/Matt Binder. And last night I've been doing a lot of call-in shows lately, sort of just waiting out the election, like before getting into anything more meaty and diving into other things. So just, had call-ins and had one a very interesting call that turned into a debate. I still don't know if the person was serious or if they were playing devil's advocate as they were claiming, but I had someone who called in to debate Israel's right to defend itself. That was very interesting. So if you're interested in hearing that and my responses to them, youtube.com/Matt Binder.
I do love, the childish nature of Zionism. Like, they love to anthropomorphize this nation state, and it's like, I don't really think that nation states have character.
They're
but
surrounded by
go for
enemies.
it. Yeah.
And it's like, well, why? First of all, like, what is it? Just the religion, or did maybe an exclusive nationalism cause that? And maybe that wasn't the best safe space for Jewish people after the World War II. Maybe we should have just maybe allowed them to say have refugee in America. But
and you know how America ensured that it wasn't surrounded by enemies? We committed mass genocides that we could control the entire territory from the Pacific to the Atlantic.
I wish I had a sound drop of the what's that? Not the emo, not Fall Out Boy, the other emo band.
Panic at the Disco.
Panic at the Disco, because there's one line was Manifest Destiny.
Yes.
It'll really always amaze me to see, especially this. Obviously, this comes from any sort of pro-Israel or Zionist type, but it always will amaze me when a U.S. official says this. It's when they say something like, the IDF is the most moral army in the world, or Israel is the safest place for Jewish people. It's like, you're literally throwing United States of America, your own country, that you represent, under the bus. We don't have the
Biden said that. He said there would not be.
The IDF is more moral than the U.S. Army. You're saying?
Yeah. Well, when you have to say it over and over again, you know that you're it must be legitimate. But Biden said that. Biden said that without Israel, there wouldn't be a safe place for the Jews in the world or Jewish people in the world. It's like, what are you trying to say about the country that you're the president of, you moron?
I mean, I agree. America is very anti-Semitic, culturally, and also our politicians. And a lot of that anti-Semitism is manifested as supporting Israel, funny enough.
Exactly. 100%. We'll talk about more of this in the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Sorry, 1 second. I gotta find the MO1.
And we got to find EmMajority Report. So 5, 4, 3, 2,
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, Twerk. Sushi and poker with the boys. Oh my God. Twerk. Wow. Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. Someone's offered to twerk. Yeah. Sushi and poker with the boys. Logic. Twerk. Sushi and poker with the boys. Boy. Twerk. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Twerk. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I had this debate 7,000 times. A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Twerk. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, all right. It's not a fun job. Twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's
twerk?
a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered to twerk?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
Real thing. That's
poker with the boys. That offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Twerk? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, Glenn.
Twerk? Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Twerk?
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks are doing great.
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best.
Violet twerk?
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't binge. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
Sorry,
she wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
And back.
We are back. Yeah, I totally forgot to promote ESPN today. We are going to be back on ESPN today. Talk a little bit about sports. You know,
yeah.
The Mets.
I also forgot my plug.
Oh, yeah.
We were just talking about the Mets in the break.
Yeah, no, I heard you guys. It's sad. It was a magical run, but Yankees Dodgers is pretty epic just from an old school baseball perspective. Now,
it's all about the Mets 24/7. That's the only baseball team that matters. And
Understood.
I was telling Bradley that might be my favorite. The 2024 Mets might be my favorite team of all time. Period. They were something special.
I mean, when they went to the World Series with it was like with Thor and with like that whole pitching rotation. I mean, it was pretty like it was with Syndergaard and all those guys.
I remember that.
Yeah, I mean that
But
was
this
pretty good in
was-
2015. But yeah,
This was something. And this was a whole different thing. This was like they were being held up by memes almost with Grimace and the Iglesias.
They were
Oh my God!
Cinderella
Song.
story.
It was yeah.
But yes, we will be on ESPN today. We'll give our picks against the spread, but we also got to catch you up on like a bunch of like major wide receiver trades in the league. We'll talk about Major League Baseball, the World Series preview. We'll probably touch on the NBA starting, the Liberty winning their first title, youtube.com/ESPN show. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, I am encouraging all parents or soon-to-be parents to go listen to the most recent episode of Left Reckoning with Courtney Rollins, who talked to us about daycare and why sort of universal daycare is something that we should maybe leave to liberal politicians, and expanding parental leave for parents is something that we need to actually set our sights a lot higher than, say, even like 2 months parental leave before you have to leave a goddamn newborn to go make money for your boss. So yeah, check that out. I'd be very curious to hear from the parents and audience, and patreon.com/leftreckoning if you want to support the show.
Ramona Frankenstein, I got my heart broken last week and just want to say that the MR community has done a lot and to help with my depression. Thank you, MR crew, and thank you to the kind people in the live chat for helping me get through this tough time. Can I get that sound drop of the guy in Tennessee, I think, who talked about how he likes to encourage posting when he was busted flirting with some twink? Ramona, I'm sorry for your heartbreak. It's the worst. Here is that sound drop.
We'll load up. This guy takes a little bit long to think, but Ramona, just stay tuned.
Ramona,
and also
stay
hang
tuned.
In there.
Jody from Chicago, let's make some predictions for when Trump is on Rogan tomorrow. My prediction is it'll just be two relatable men talking about how trans people and immigrants are ruining some I think you missed a word, some Musk fanboying, but what will happen when Rogan brings up the vaccine? Trump will talk around it.
Rogan will push out.
I think we're going to hear the most normal conversation two people have ever heard. I'm going to stake my reputation on it. I think you're going to be listening to those two guys. You're going to be like, wow, what a normal conversation. This is like riding a bus and hearing two people talk about the weather. That's what I think.
Bold prediction. Do we have
I don't know. I wasn't expecting Trump's.
Okay, yeah. Try to encourage people with posts and try to, help them if I can.
There you go. Bender, keep going. There you go, Ramona.
I was gonna say it could go either way. I mean, I wasn't expecting Trump's interview with WWE legend The Undertaker on his podcast to give us the most bizarre moment that I think I've seen of the year so far, which is, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they're talking about trans women in sports. And they bring up Amani from the Olympics. And The Undertaker brings out his 11-year-old daughter to come out, and she comes out and sits on her dad's lap. And Undertaker starts talking about like the reason, one of the reasons he's voting for Trump is to protect his daughter and, her ability to play in sports and about protecting his daughter. And as he's saying this, Trump is looking at his daughter and going, oh, she's so beautiful. What a beautiful girl. She's so beautiful. And it's like, dude, protect your daughter from Trump, for God's sakes. What are you talking about? It's so weird.
Yeah. I mean, that protect your daughter thing. It's the guy that shows up to their daughter's prom with a gun and like threatens the date or something like that. I mean, this isn't about protecting one's daughter. It's about men who have a tenuous grasp on their own masculinity, projecting that onto others, honestly, is my view of that. But
I mean, I have to imagine that at least like 1% of all Walmart sales are those T-shirts that just say like, if you touch my daughter, I'll touch my gun, like that, like, stuff like that. And they all come from like a handful of states.
Yeah. That's that's definitely the demographic. But in terms of the Rogan thing, is he going to say yes to Kamala? Because he initially said he wasn't going to have Trump on. Because the Kamala campaign is advertising that they went out to Rogan. And I think she would want to go on there and talk about how she is for legalizing weed nationally, which Trump is not. So
if he was smart, he would have her on, because I think she would bring more views to his show than Trump. No one would be shocked at a Trump Rogan conversation. They'll give them exactly what they expect. But Kamala on Rogan, people will tune in just to see what the hell could happen, because anything could happen between that.
I think Rogan's too afraid. I think